How does a person answer why something happens?
When you look at the findings in different fields,
Scant is the part of life in which we live.
To attain the highest values.
Yeah, so I've been following your work for ages now, and you've made quite a name for yourself in the online space, specifically around Notion. And that was not where everything began for you. You studied web design, strategy, and then you were doing a lot of that as work. The Notion part is something that's kind of recently crystallized for you. It seems like this perfect marriage between your skill set and the tool, and you've kind of blown up from there. But I'd like to start, like, how would you describe what that skill set is that you bring to it? Why was Notion a good fit? What makes you good at understanding the tool and explaining it to other people?
I think it's probably a little bit of the design thinking studies that I did, just kind of for myself, just wanting a system that worked. Like I've struggled, I think, always with like paper bullet journaling and Asana and to-do lists and Evernote and you name it. Like I think a lot of people can relate to that, like trying to find a system that works for you. And I also don't consider myself a very type A, very organized person. So that's something I've had to learn to be. And just seeing the results of that, when you put a plan together, you do that 90-day planning, I needed a place to do that strategic thinking and also the follow through in one place. And I never found another tool that I think reflected the way my brain kind of conceptualized those pieces. So I think it's just been, in a way, I think I kind of got obsessed and I was like studying, like, well, there's got to be like a system, there's got to be like the way to do this, right? So I was reading the 12-week year, just like studying so many different people and so many different methodologies to figure out like, how do you manage a project and follow through on your goals? Like it was just something I really wanted to figure out. And I realized like no one tool was going to do that. And so I was trying to do, strategic planning inside of Asana, and it felt really messy, and Evernote wasn't the place to do that strategic thinking either. So when Notion came around, it was kind of like the best place where I could be messy and strategic and tactical all in one place. Like it gave room for doing a little bit of all of that. So I don't know if I can boil it down to necessarily a specific skill set per se, but I think my design thinking background gives me that willingness to be in process and to be comfortable with a system being imperfect. And I think a lot of people struggle when they come to Notion and it's they want it to look perfect right away, or they want it to be really clear and linear. And I'm not a very clear or linear person. Like I'm very exploratory. I'm comfortable being in process and being messy. So for me, it's just I give myself permission to iterate and to improve in the system over time. The more that I learned about what the tool can do, like, well, what else can it do? And I found myself just excited to push the boundaries on, okay, well, could I use it for this creative project? Could I use it for a research paper? Could I use it for my to-do list or my sewing projects? And it just kind of kept expanding. And I was like, how far could I push this? Like, what could be possible with this? And that's kind of how it began.
Yeah, so that's cool. You touched on like, you've talked about this before, and I think in your teaching philosophy, it's very much like a show, don't tell approach. Learning Notion is very contextual, very personalized to like what you want to use it for. So I want to explore that more when we talk about your teaching philosophy now that you bring into your Notion courses. But when did you first come across Notion? And like I remember like my first time, it's a very like unstructured thing, and that's I was the same as what you mentioned earlier. Like I need to like import a template. I need this thing to like look great already. But I think you may have talked about this before. You can't really build Notion that way. You have to build it from the ground up yourself for it to really for you to get value out of it. What was that process like for you when you first came across it?
Yeah, and I often recommend to people, like, you kind of need a reason to use it first. And so pick what is the part of your life or workflow that has the most friction, and use Notion to start with that. And so the very first thing that got me into Notion was my permaculture certificate. I needed a place to store and document tons of notes. Like my teacher was giving us paper handouts and then random links and emails that were huge. Like it was kind of up to us as students to document however we wanted and to present however we wanted. So it was kind of like a gigantic open canvas in terms of what our final project looked like. So we had to do this mapping project over the course of 18 months. So it's like, this is a growing, piece of documentation and a project that just has so many moving parts. And I had tried Notion, I think maybe back in 2018 or 2017 or something. And like you, I kind of tried it and was like, I don't really see what it's like I couldn't see a use case. And I think that's exactly the problem, is like, it's not till you see what is possible that you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm going to go back and see if this could be a good place to just store that messy thinking. So for me, it started as a very messy canvas. And as I started to give it more order and more shape, I was like, oh man, this is kind of cool. Maybe I'll do my weekly agenda in there, daily journal. I was like, oh, what else could we do in here? I want to get all of our business projects in here. And so I had to convince my husband to be willing to do that. So I was like, can I recreate what we're doing in Asana inside of Notion? So it started kind of slowly, and it sort of just, snowballed into, well, could it take over this? Could it take over how I'm doing Evernote? Could it take over this? And slowly I just found myself using it more because it was this one place where everything lived. And even though it's not perfect, these different tools are so specialized and they do certain things really, really well. In some ways you can say, because Notion is a generalist tool, it's kind of the same way I think of myself. Like, I'm good at a lot of different things and have these like little focused specialties. I found myself craving the integration more than I craved the specialty of certain tools. I was more willing to accept its shortcomings because the lack of friction from my to-dos and my thoughts and my goals, everything just kind of had one place to live. I was like, this is just, it felt like my brain just felt more calm immediately. So I was like, okay, what else can I get in there?
Yeah. And so you approached it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, you mentioned about the teaching philosophy. One thing that I think has been huge is my willingness to show exactly my workspace. So people can see my goals, they can see my projects, they can see the clients that I'm working with. I get permission to show those things. But for me, it's more exhausting to create a demo that I'm like, let me just show you what my real life looks like, because that's going to also show you, I can be very honest about, oh, you can see that I have many projects on my plate and these ones haven't been checked off. And I think people really appreciate that I'm not coming to them as a guru. I'm just coming to them, someone who's maybe a couple steps ahead and is like, hey, come along with me on this journey.
On the journey. Yeah, exactly. So I love this idea of being comfortable with it being unstructured. Because I think that's something you have to get over to begin with, that it is this constant work in progress, but you don't have any switching costs of moving between tools. You don't have that sort of friction. So that's the trade-off that you're making for that unstructured approach. So I'm curious, like, when you first came across it, how you approached learning it. Like, for someone starting out in it now, did you sort of identify the building blocks? Like, I need to understand how blocks work, how databases work. And like, you kind of like started there and then saw how these things work together. Like, how did you approach that?
That's an interesting question, right? Because it's hard to go back to remember at the time. It's not like I knew this was going to take over my life and my business. So it was just another tool that I was trying out. I think I'm very comfortable and very familiar in the software world. So I'm poking and clicking and exploring. Like, I have no problem doing that and picking up new tools pretty quickly. And I had been very familiar with Airtable, and I'd even hired an Airtable consultant to help me with a project. So I was, pretty familiar with some, I think, even more advanced database functionality and different kinds of tools. So to me, picking up Notion felt pretty intuitive. It felt pretty easy. I think it's so easy to get to like 60% of the way there, and you can do what you need to do in Notion very, very quickly. But that last 40, 20, 10% of using Notion is what changes everything. And it totally supercharges your workflow. But I think some people are willing to push through that frustration, and others are like, this is annoying. Why doesn't it just work? This is very frustrating. And so I have noticed, it's been very interesting to notice what kinds of people are drawn to Notion, and where some people just get very frustrated and angry at the tool. And some people really like that building process and exploration process, where others are like, this is productivity porn, this is really annoying. And so it's just been really fascinating to watch. I think it just these tools attract different types of people, I think.
I want to get into like how you've also built your reputation through content, and I'm sure that YouTube channel of yours is where you get a lot of like some really great feedback, and a lot of characters emerge. You said you're a messy, like unstructured person sort of by default. Like, that seems antithetical to Notion, like being like this organized, database approach. Everything's linked and tagged and stuff. Like, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I guess I don't see them as separate things, because the things that need to be in structure are structured, but then within within a database entry, I can have all sorts of messy notes. So I feel like I can have the best of both worlds in there, as long as you have those core databases. So for me, it's like the knowledge hub or the library where I'm storing everything that I'm consuming.
Yeah.
And so I think coming up with that initial structure of like, what are the databases that I need, projects, tasks, library, whatever. But once those are structured, everything else can be play. I can play inside of a project, and it can be messy. I can throw images in there and process them later. So as long as you've got the key pieces, I think there's still so much room to play. And you can just you can make pages anywhere you want in your space. So if you want a more creative space to go to, I can do that in Marie HQ under creativity and just have a place where I can play and not worry too much about like, where does this information go?
Yeah. That's interesting, because that's I think a stumbling block probably for many, where it's like, I feel like it was one of like Rome's big selling points, that you don't have to figure out where it goes, right? You just go and you do. Yeah. But I like that. It's really just kind of owning your space, your Notion space.